All right. What is up, YouTube? It's so good to be back for this live stream here. I hope you guys are doing all right. And just let me know how things are sounding, how things are looking for you. Um, I'm really stoked just to get to hang out and get to talk more about technique, which we've been talking a lot about on my Patreon site. Did this big video on technique. I guess I released it back on Wednesday this past week. All about 10 tips on how I like to play the mandolin. And there's a lot of different ways of playing the mandolin for sure, but these are just things that I found really helpful and things that I think would be helpful for other people to check out as well. So I hope that was enjoyable. If you checked it out, there's a link to the video in the chat I just posted there, and would love for you just to take a listen, see what you think. And there's even a 5-tip additional video that you can find on my Patreon site for $5 plus patrons as well. So if you're hungry for more, you can check that out. What's up, Green Sky? Good to see you. Thanks for stopping by. And for all of you guys listening out there, feel free to drop a line in the chat if you have any questions about the videos that you saw and wanted me to discuss anything further. I'd be happy to talk about that here. That's kind of why I wanted to do this live stream here. But yeah, it's a great day here in Clemson, South Carolina, where I'm at. It's really pretty outside, and this week has been kind of eventful. We've been doing some stuff with IBMA Virtual World of Bluegrass Festival that's been going on, which is usually kind of my favorite week out of the year, where we go to Raleigh, North Carolina as a band, Mile 12, and get to do a lot of showcases, meet and greet with a bunch of amazing bluegrass artists and promoters. And sadly, none of that's happening this year. All those hallway jams that went to like 3 or 4 in the morning aren't happening, but it's still been really great. IBMA is an amazing organization and foundation that is solely pretty much responsible for promoting bluegrass music and making it really an industry standard, which is pretty awesome. So check out the IBMA if you haven't already. In fact, they're doing a bunch of live showcases this week, which is pretty cool. Even through, I think tonight, you can go see a bunch of live performances from different bluegrass artists, some really top-notch players, and I think it's all available on their website. So check that out. And we actually had a big surprise. Mile 12 ended up winning an award called the New Artist of the Year Award back on Thursday night when they had their big awards show at the Ryman, and we've all been pretty on cloud 9 for the past couple of days about that. It's a big honor, and we're really excited about that, and hopefully it means when gigs start happening again, that'll just, I guess, increase our reach and help us keep playing. So and also Tabitha had a great honor too. She got Instrumentalist of the Year at the Momentum Awards at IBMA too, which was really exciting. So yeah, thanks, Peter. Appreciate the congrats. And yeah, it's been a good week so far. So glad I could spend this Saturday with you guys. And I was just noticing on YouTube, Baron Collins Hill has his Mando lessons live stream, I guess at 1 or 2 on Saturdays as well. So if I'm catching any of you guys from that stream, it's great to have you here. And just by a little plug, Baron Collins Hill has a great website, mandolessons.com, and has even more mandolin lessons if you're hungry for more ideas about technique. And yeah, it's pretty cool, all the amazing resources out there for folks. Even during pandemic, you can keep learning and keep meeting other players, and that's what I love about doing these live streams, is just getting to hear from you guys on the chat. But maybe to start things off, I'll just give you guys a little sample of a song I've been working on. This is one I learned off of this record called Dreamer's Waltz by an amazing guitar player. And I don't know if you guys have heard this tune. It's a tune called Crockett's Honeymoon. I'm not exactly sure where it comes from, but it's pretty awesome. Let's see if I can do it justice for you here. We'll try it out. like that. That's a tune I learned from Scott Nygaard, again, off of that album Dreamer's Waltz. And it's one I'm hoping to take a look at on my Patreon site. I'll be posting a video about this later this upcoming week, which I'm excited about. And hopefully be explaining those 2 different octave variations. So just something to watch out for. And you can sign up on my Patreon site for as little as $3 a month, and you get access to all the PDF transcriptions for videos like this. I've got a handful of tunes that I've posted already, with a bunch more to come, so check those out. And we'll also be taking a look at some chop chord ideas, hopefully in the near future. I've been talking about, just explaining what goes behind this kind of tricky chop chord shape. I hate that, this is like the first chord that most people are told to learn on the mandolin. And it's probably one of the hardest chords to play as well. And it may seem kind of arbitrary and, not very helpful to learn this chord at the start, but it's really an amazing technique that you can use to make your playing sound a lot more appropriate in a bluegrass setting. And it also gives you some ideas and a structure to work from when you're playing licks or playing melodies, to kind of make your mandolin playing sound a little bit more vernacular to the style. All those little iconic bluegrass melodies or licks or fills kind of come out of that shape there. So we'll be taking a look at that. So be on the lookout for all this stuff in the future. But let's see, how's it going here in the chat? It's great to hear from you guys. James William Houghton, glad to see a double live stream today. Nice. Thanks so much for stopping by. Say hey to Baron if you run into him online, I guess. Do you have a regular live stream schedule? I don't have a regular live stream schedule at the minute, but that's been something I've been considering. Been trying to test a couple times right now, I guess, while I'm first getting started. This is only my 3rd live stream here on Patreon, on YouTube. And I'm hoping to get more into a regular schedule, just finding what works best for all of my Patreon supporters so that we can all be together as much as possible. But yeah, I hope we'll be doing it probably on the weekends for the most part. Been doing mostly Sundays and Saturdays seems like a good day for most people. If you have a preference, feel free to drop me a line or send me a message, and we'll see what we can do to make it happen. But thanks so much for everyone for tuning in, and thanks for the kind words about the tune as well. It's been a fun one to kind of work up. So Peter Joseph Palmer brings up a good point. Right hand technique for Sam Bush chops would be cool. And this is something I talked a little bit about in this 10 tip video, I should say. And it's something that I don't see a whole lot of people talking about in the mandolin community, which is a shame. And when you get right-handed advice, usually people are really specific about what they think is the right technique for the right hand, or pick hand if you're left-handed out there. Sorry for just lumping you into the right-handed lot, but just for consistency, saying the right hand is the picking hand. There's a lot of options that people have that don't often get explored because of the prevailing thought or the prevailing theory about what the best way is. And I think the best way isn't always evident, I guess, if that makes sense. There isn't just one right way of playing the mandolin, which is, exemplified by all the great players out there who do such different things, and Sam Bush being a great example. Thanks for bringing him up, Peter, because he's one of my heroes, and he kind of often gets overshadowed by maybe some other mandolin players that are also popular today, like Chris Thiele or Sierra Hull as well, and who all have amazing technique and some of the most technically proficient mandolins out there today. But Sam Bush is an absolute hoss. In fact, they call him Hoss, I think, or they call his mandolin Hoss, because it's got such a powerful sound to it. And this is exactly, what I'd like to present through this 10-tip video and through this live stream, is that there's all sorts of ways of playing the mandolin. Sam Bush's technique is so awesome, even though it's really different than what other mandolin players do. And I think what makes him different is that he has a really strong forearm motion in how he plays. I think he still has some wrist in there, but I remember hearing that he broke his wrist in a car door, which really limited his mobility in his wrist, which kind of changed his mandolin technique by necessity. In fact, I was watching him play the other night at that awards show at the IBMA. His band, the Newgrass Revival, was inducted into the Bluegrass Hall of Fame, which is a pretty cool moment. And just hearing him talk about the band was really special, but also getting to see him play live, while all this pandemic is going on. It's kind of a rare occasion to see someone play live, unfortunately. So, just seeing his arm really go is so incredible. He's kind of a full body mandolin player, and especially when he chops as well. Like he's got a lot of power coming from his forearm, which I think is something to try out as well, because a lot of people just say that you should use the wrist, right? A lot of people should just say that you get more accuracy or you get more consistency if you just kind of plant your wrist and use this motion. Some people do that even when they're chopping as well, but I think you do lose some potential for power whenever you just stick to the wrist. So try using the forearm a little bit. I'm excited to see what other people think about this idea, and I think maybe the best approach for me at least has been combining both the wrist and the forearm to create kind of a hybrid between the two different approaches. And I don't see a whole lot of mandolin players doing this either, but I think you can get all that power from the forearm, like I mentioned, while still getting some of that precision and that sensitivity to when the pick meets the strings with your wrist if you kind of keep it in action. Because you never want to lock up a part of your body when you're playing. I feel like you want to stay as loose as possible. And for me, like when I just plant my wrist on the strings behind the bridge here, it feels like I'm locking my forearm, which causes tension in my shoulder, which causes, other problems as well. And if I'm locking my wrist and just use my forearm, I, get tension in my wrist, which is bad too. So to avoid both of those, if I just kind of stay loose and allow my wrist to stay in action while my forearm is moving, it seems to clear things up for me. But it takes a lot of experimentation and a lot of, a lot of practice, I guess, for lack of a better word. But just be open-minded, I'd say, as you keep moving forward. Great question, Peter. Catching up with some other questions here. Hello from Oregon. Hey, Richard, good to see you. And then Peter also says a lot out on the dampen, not much on the right hand. So dampening the strings, maybe. If you have your right hand too close to the bridge, sometimes that does affect the sound, right? So if you plant your wrist on the bridge itself, you can already tell, like, creates this, kind of filtered effect almost, and that might be kind of a cool color to check out. But yeah, we try to avoid dampening the sound of the mandolin just because it's a pretty quiet instrument to start out with, and you want to make sure that you have a fighting chance of being heard amongst the banjo players, right? So Antibiotic Pat, how are you doing? Thanks so much for dropping by. He says, I noticed that you pick from the elbow, which many players pick from the wrist. This conscious thing, do you have any thoughts on pros and cons of this? Yeah, so similar to what I was talking about with Sam Bush's approach. And my approach has been, I think, to combine the two. And I talk about it more in the video, so check out the video if you'd like a kind of an in-depth description of my thought process on it. But again, just try not to lock up any part of your body has been a huge factor for me to reduce tension, to feel relaxed when I'm playing, even at faster tempos as well, which I think is a big consideration. Like, you want to pick a technique that suits whatever tempo you're playing at, whatever style of music you're playing at, something that can be adaptive in those different situations. But yeah, I'm so glad that's a relevant topic for other mandolin players, because I think it's something that people should really think hard about. Try a lot of different things and see what works best for you, since we all have different body anatomy, and everyone's going to kind of gravitate towards a different sound or a different style depending on who our favorite players are too. Yeah. Thanks for that plug, Jason. Talk a little bit more about that idea in the video. Okay, James Williams Newton says, who are the new mandolin players you are most excited about right now? Oh man, that's a great question. Maybe tying this into the technique topic. There are some really amazingly different sounding mandolin players out there today, which is so cool. And some of my favorites are, maybe some folks that you've heard of, some folks that you haven't. One of my favorite mandolin players out there is this guy named Teo Quayle. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's out in California, and he plays with this young band called the Barefoot Quails, and also plays with this band called Crying Uncle, and Crying Uncle's really crushing it right now. And Teo is like, I want to say he's like 11 or 12 right now, and he's just, the most exciting mandolin player on the scene, I think, because he's just a monster and plays from the heart. You can really tell. and doesn't sound like another Chris Thiele copy, which has kind of been the case for most of us, myself included. I'm sure we all take a lot of cues from Chris and or Adam Steffi or players like him, but Teo kind of combines, the best of that world with his own ideas and with David Grisman and all sorts of cool stuff like that. So he's a monster player. You should check out some of his videos. They've got some recorded work. Yeah, Teo, Uncle Bobby knows. He's awesome, man. So check out his stuff. And there's a few others as well. Like I think maybe players my age that I'm really excited about, that I love listening to and love playing with. Like Tristan Scroggins is an amazing mandolin player who also has a Patreon page that you should go check out and support. And Tristan played with his dad, Jeff Scroggins, in Colorado for a long time, but now he's just kind of doing music from home in Nashville and does a great job of teaching, and he plays with Missy Raines now as well. So Tristan's amazing. Casey Campbell's another Nashvilleian who's a really monster player. He's been playing since like the age of 3. There's pictures of him on stage with a little plastic guitar at the age of 3 with Bill Monroe at the Station Inn, which is kind of crazy. Those two players are amazing. Dominic Leslie, Sierra Hull, of course. You guys know and love Sierra as well. She's incredible. She's kind of leading the forefront of the mandolin, it seems like, these days, which is pretty cool. So they all have different techniques too, which I love. And listening to each one of those players, you really get kind of a snapshot of their influences, but also you can see how they've combined all these different things together to create something unique to themselves, I guess, which is pretty cool. But great question there. All right, so Green Sky says, I would like to ask how you learn entire songs by heart. Oh, cool. Yeah, that's a really good question. And memorization is something I'd like to talk about more on the site. I've done like kind of some follow-up videos that you can see if you're like a $5 plus patron. You can access these bonus lessons that I offer as kind of follow-ups to some of the videos I have on YouTube here. And I like to memorize songs as soon as I have them under my fingers, to answer your question. And there's a couple ways about that. I like to learn tunes by ear for the most part now, without tablature or without sheet music, because I find sometimes the page can be a crutch for me, where I tend to look at the page too much, even though I've already kind of know the tune and I should be memorizing it, but I'm instead relying on the reference on the page. So if I can learn it by ear, it automatically removes that temptation just to rely upon the paper. And I feel like I'm forced to memorize it, because I don't have that reference. And to memorize it by heart, like you're asking, I think repetition is the key. So as you're learning the tune, try to break it down into small, repeatable phrases. So, like that tune I was playing earlier, Crockett's Honeymoon. Like, that's the first phrase to my mind. And so if I'm learning this for the first time, I'd want to try to play that phrase over and over again, maybe like 4 or 5 times in a row without making a mistake, without any reference, before moving on to the next phrase. And then there you go. You've got that part memorized by heart. And then now you have to start kind of building that song brick by brick from the ground up. That's the first brick. The next brick is... and then you play that phrase, 4 or 5 times in a row without making a mistake, and then move on to the next one and the next one. And every new phrase you add on, you have to feel what it's like to combine the phrases together, right? So now that you learned the first two, again and again and again. So that's my best tip on how to memorize by heart. Just break things down into manageable chunks and then repeat the heck out of it until you feel like it's under your fingers. Another helpful technique is just humming the melody, right? If you can hum the melody away from your instrument, then you're not just relying upon the muscle memory. You have kind of like an internal roadmap for how the song should go, which is really important too. You don't want to just rely on the physicality of the instrument. But good question, Green Sky. The Pelican 3 says, can you pick How Mountain Girls Can Love? I'm afraid I don't know if I could play that on my own. I could definitely jam on that with the band here, but it probably wouldn't sound very good without a banjo. But good request, man. That's awesome. All right, so moving down here, Jason says, Have you always played with an armrest? Does it help with technique or comfort? And that's a really good question. Something I mentioned really briefly in the video, but I'd love to talk about it more here because I do think it is a really helpful piece of gear to have on your instrument. So this is an armrest here that it just attaches kind of with the normal gear or the normal tech that a violin chin rest would have, right? It's the same type of hardware. And this one was built by a great luthier in Nashville, Tennessee. His name's Dan Voigt, and he makes some crazy good mandolins and guitars. I'm not sure if he's building much these days, but I got this armrest from him, and I really like how it actually has this pretty steep angle to it, if you can see. It points towards the strings, which is really helpful when you put your arm on the armrest. It kind of sets up your hand to meet the strings in a way that other flat armrests don't. I don't really like the really flat armrests that are parallel to the face of the instrument because it just feels like the same as the side of the instrument. It's like really really pointed and kind of harsh on your forearm. It doesn't feel like it's very smooth. So I think it's really helpful to get something that feels comfortable in order to help with your technique. That's the first key. And you can email Dan if you're interested in one of his. I think he's got a website out there. There's another great company I recommend called Banjo Lit, which is from the Czech Republic. And you can order a custom-made one. I think they're it might be around $70 or $80, but it's a worthwhile investment. And they'll ship it straight to you and make sure that it looks really good with your mandolin, which is another cool thing. But yeah, those are really quality armrests that feel great too. And what I like about having just an armrest in general is that hopefully, if the mandolin armrest is situated solidly on the instrument, it's not sliding around. It helps kind of instill this habit where you're placing your forearm on the exact same place on the instrument every time. And that's one of my big points of reference when I'm playing. I'm not one of those players that plants my fingers on the face of the instrument for a point of reference, or even plants my wrist behind the bridge as another point of reference. I'm more of a floating player, but I do have this big point of reference on my forearm where even though I'm moving my forearm a little bit like this, it's always within kind of a frame of reference. I'm always kind of moving within this one spectrum so that I always know where the strings are with the pick. Because if you're totally floating, if you don't have any point of reference on the strings or on the mandolin, it's really hard to figure out where the strings are with the pick. So you got to have some type of contact with the mandolin, and the armrest really helps with that. So hopefully that answers your question, but very, very good question there. Let's see, let me scroll up here and check out. Uncle Bobby says, I recommend checking out Crying Uncle playing EMD. Yeah, totally. Yeah, Teo does that dog stuff so well. I think he's gotten to hang out with David, being in the Bay Area of California, so learning from the best there, which is so cool. All right, so Casper, hey, how's it going, Casper? Thanks so much for joining. A very basic question: how do you prevent the neck from diving when standing up with the mandolin? Do you support it with your left hand, with your right forearm, or a combination of both, maybe? Yeah, nice question, because that's a that's a big consideration with especially these F model mandolins, because usually you connect the strap to this scroll here, which looks really cool, but sometimes isn't very practical because if you're just holding up the strap like this, the mandolin tends to dive down like this. It's very it's funny, there's more surface area to the instrument on this end, but there's more weight on this end because of the solid wood and the extra weight from the tuners and the gears and everything. So this is the big problem when it's standing up, right? It's how to support the instrument even though you have less points of contact, right? Because your legs aren't supporting the mandolin like it is when you're sitting down here. And when I'm standing up with the strap, usually what I do is I do try to support the mandolin with my forearm like this. So you can't see, but I've got the mandolin floating on my body right now. And if I just kind of rest my forearm like this while the strap is holding the instrument up, it's enough to kind of keep the mandolin from doing that. And I think it's good to support the neck with the left hand when you're standing up a little bit, but you don't want to rely upon it too much because it might get in the way of other things that you might want to do. Like if you're shifting up the neck, you don't want to have to support the neck while you're shifting up, because that might affect the way things sound or the way things feel on the instrument. So, trying to support it with your forearm is probably the best way forward. A couple other pieces of gear that might be helpful. Actually, I like playing with this fancy cage on the back of my mandolin. This is called a tone guard. And it feels maybe a little bit uncomfortable if you're not used to it, but I actually like playing with this now because it gives kind of the mandolin a little bit extra, I don't know, friction on my midriff, if you know what I mean. So it's like not just the smooth wood sliding up and down my clothing. I have this kind of cage that's offering a little bit more support and a little bit more grip so that it doesn't just flop around too much. Another thing I find really helpful is just having a good strap, and this is a really solid strap that I like recommending. It's a strap by a company called Pine Grove, and it's just a really thick piece of leather that offers a lot of support. I used to play with one of those braided leather kind of string straps that a lot of mandolin players use, and they look really cool, and some people can use them really well, but I found that it made the mandolin kind of flop around on my body a little bit more when I was standing, and when I made the switch to this Pine Grove, it seemed like it really did the trick for me. So that's such a big thing when it comes to standing. You don't want the mandolin flopping around, right? You want it to be as secure on your body as possible to ensure that the strings are always in the same place with your right hand. Otherwise, it's going to create a lot of inaccuracy. All right. So James says, I was lucky enough to meet Sierra at the beginning of the year, and she was lovely. Puts on a great show, too. Awesome. Yeah. Sierra is one of the nicest persons I've met. So not only super talented, but she's just a great person. Puts on an awesome show. So Michael Sappington, how's it going, Michael? It's good to see you. Thanks for stopping by. Says, earlier when playing, your right hand was floating. My right hand fingers brushed the surface of the mando. How can I transition to a closed fist? Also, do you ever have your right hand fingers out? That's a great question that I didn't talk about in this video, and thanks for following up here about that too, because that's another kind of thing that I think is fun to look at other mandolin players and see what they do. So as far as what to do with the floating position, I think probably the best thing to do is to practice in front of a mirror, which actually is one of these tips that I gave on this bonus lesson on Patreon, because then you can really see what's going on from an outside perspective. You don't have to, worry about these bad habits kind of coming back. If you're looking at yourself, dead on like this, you can see anything that's happening that you're not aware of, and you can kind of change it subconsciously. So that might be a good tip, just to see what it feels like to change something about your technique like this. But as far as what to do with the fingers, there are some great mandolin players who do plant on the face of the instrument. So I don't want to discredit that. I think Adam Steffi being the primary case, he plants his pinky finger on the surface of the instrument like this. He's one of the best players in the world. He's won Grammys with Alison Krauss and Union Station, and has helped progress a number of amazing bluegrass bands through the circuit. And look at his playing to see if that's something that might suit your style better, because like I said, everyone has to figure out what works best for their body and their personal musical taste. So that's an example of one person who does a great job with that. And then another kind of variant of that style is where you kind of allow your fingers to brush on the surface of the instrument without planting. And some great players do that. Emery Lester does that a lot. His mandolin is just like beaten up down here. He's like torn the whole finish off of his mandolin because his fingers are just floating down here, which is kind of awesome. Actually, I kind of love it when mandolins have a bunch of scuff marks and a bunch of finish torn off, because you can tell that they've really played and loved that instrument a lot. So Emery Lester is a great example, and one of my favorite mandolin players is this guy Jesse Cobb, who used to play with the infamous String Dusters, and he played on their first 3 records as well as a live record, and some of my favorite mandolin playing is on there. He has kind of like that Sam Bush angst and Sam Bush energy with some Chris Steele ideas mixed in. It's kind of a cool combo, but he's a mandolin player unto himself. And he'll do this interesting thing where he'll kind of swap between having more of a closed fist approach to having kind of more of a splayed finger brushing the top approach. And I've seen him do it where he'll switch mid-song, mid-phrase almost, which is pretty amazing. And it kind of does affect the sound a little bit. I think if you have your fingers splayed out like this and you're brushing on the instrument, or if you have them splayed out like this away from the instrument, you're creating kind of a little bit more dead weight by that length of your fingers, right? It's kind of a little bit harder on the upstrokes because it feels like your wrists or your forearms having to work a little bit more, which I think actually makes it sound cool because you have this kind of exaggerated swing. And I find it helpful to do that sometimes when I'm playing really fast. I'll maybe change my technique a little bit and allow my fingers to brush on the face of the instrument, and kind of makes it sound a little bit grittier, a little bit more energetic sometimes. So that could be a cool flavor just to throw in from time to time. But I basically, on that video I talked about there's 2 personal criteria I have for whatever technique I settle on, and the first is, does it sound good, right? That's the big consideration. Does it sound the way I want it to? Does it let me play all the different styles I want to? Does it help me play in all different tempos the way I want to? Is speed a limitation or key a limitation? And then thinking about, okay, how does it feel, right? Is it giving me any tension? Is it stiff in any way? Anything like that? Those are the 2 big considerations. So, try what works best for you. But maybe the third consideration is that you don't want to be limited. Maybe that's tied into both of those, but you don't want to be limited with any technique that you have. So being able to play the mandolin a few different ways is actually advantageous because you can, maybe draw out different colors or different sounds on your instrument. You don't want to just sound the same for everything that you play. So if you're playing like a real swingy song, maybe you do want to splay your fingers for that song. Or if you're playing like a real clean classical piece, like maybe you want to tuck your fingers in. Play it better than me too. But yeah, so I'd recommend all those things for you. That's a great question. Thanks so much for bringing that up. So let me catch up with a few things here. The Pelican 3, how can you develop licks from arpeggios, say in the key of B? Cool. Yeah. I find when playing in a different key, a lot of times my technique goes out the window, which is something that you want to try to avoid as much as possible, right? So having some pre-planned licks is actually a really great way of feeling confident and, having a way of practicing those tougher harmonic centers and, being able to maintain the same technique that you have in some of these more friendly keys like D or G, right? So one thing I like to do is play out of a familiar shape. So I mentioned at the beginning of the stream that the chop chord shape is a really great way of finding some familiar licks, right? So if you can find your B major chop chord way up here, you can find all sorts of cool licks like this one. That's my 101 bluegrass chop chord lick. And just playing that over and over again over this B chord, you're going to start seeing some other lick opportunities show up. Like, what if you even just reverse that lick, right? Well, that's pretty good. And then the beauty about this shape is that you can use this for a B chord, right? You can play that lick over any B major chord that you have in a song. And then you can also use the same fingerings for a different chord using this chop chord shape, and then you've got another lick that you can use over that chord, right? So you could even play the same lick over E major now if you're playing over the 4 chord in the key of B. And then let's say you get to the 5 chord in this key as well, so you just move that shape 2 frets up. And there's so many great licks that have been played in the shape. You can listen to other mandolin players for some ideas, and hopefully I'll have some stuff to share with you on the Patreon site and here on YouTube before too long, kind of discussing that shape further, because I love playing out of this shape. It gives me a lot of freedom, because I know that basically I just have to operate within this framework, and I can play over any chord I want to with the same fingerings, which is so cool. So that's one familiar shape in the key of B. Another one that I like to use is this one here, kind of out of this double stop shape. And I guess there's a couple shapes that are encapsulated within this double stop. You have this really great pentatonic shape. 3 strings of territory that basically you use these 3 fingers, but you're using your pinky once, but it's not too difficult, right? And any of those notes are going to sound great over any chord in the key of B, which is awesome. So you can just noodle around with those notes in any order all day long. It's going to sound pretty decent. It may not sound like the most interesting lick in the world, but you can get by. So I think about that as being kind of contained with this double stop shape right here, which are 2 notes that you can play over your B chord. But this is another movable shape, right? So if you're playing over an E chord in the key of B now, you can do the same thing, right? Find the same shape for your E chord, E and B on your D and G strings. That's going to sound really good over your E chord. And then doing the same thing for your F sharp chord. So those are just a couple ideas for you. And like I said, try to make your technique the same. Just come back to this theme, because oftentimes when you come to these unfamiliar keys, we tend to tense up, our shoulders go up, like I mentioned, or we hunch over, or we get real stressed because we're playing in front of people that we really admire and we want to look impressive, and all this stuff kind of comes to mind, which chokes us, and we end up not playing as well as we want to. And trying to sound the same no matter what key you're in is a huge goal to shoot for. And I think you really have to spend some time woodshedding licks like this in an unfamiliar key for that to become familiar, for it to become comfortable, and to be able to maintain your technique from those common keys like G, C, and D or A. And I think anything that you do in the key of B is actually going to help benefit your technique for those other keys as well. It's cool how music is very cyclical like that. Any work that you put in one aspect can pay off in another as well. So really great question there. Well, I just want to take a break here for a second and do a little PSA about this Patreon site I keep talking about. I'd love for you guys, if you're not on there already, to check it out. I've got this, this fancy scrolling bar. I feel like I'm on like a news show or something like that. But you can find the Patreon link on that little feed, the ticker, and then you can also go down to the description and you can click the link there for easy access. But check it out. I've got 4 different levels of support that give you access to a lot of different stuff. And for as little as $3 a month, you get tons of transcriptions. All of the solo arrangements that I did for Mandolin Mondays are on there. All these tunes that we've been learning on the site, handouts for the fretboard, learning the fretboard video I did, for pick directions, all sorts of cool stuff, and lots more coming soon. There's bonus lessons, there's bonus transcriptions from other mandolin players that I've put up there, and there's even options to do video exchanges with me, where you can send me a video of you playing something that you're working on, and I can get back to you for some critique and some feedback. So I'd love to work with you in that setting if you want to check it out. And if you're not into that, I've got a PayPal donation link. No pressure, but any donations are appreciated and go to me and Tabitha's house fund for 2021. We'll see. And you can just check out all the stuff I've got on social media too. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook. But enough of that. Sorry, just a little ad there, shameless plug. But back to you guys' questions. Gary Leonard says 2 thumbs up on Pine Grove leather. I'm so glad that you like that. I really was impressed by their straps. I think I heard about them from Ethan Satiawan, who's another great up and coming mandolin player. I should have mentioned as well. He's from the Boston area and just graduated from Berkeley. And I just love the way it felt, and love the way it really just made the mandolin feel more secure. It's a great comment, Carrie. All right, Casper says, I play an F-style mando with a tone guard too, but my strap is narrow. Maybe it's time to get a new strap. Yeah, definitely check out Pine Grove. I haven't seen too many other options out there that I'm really excited about, but there might be some other good ones as well. So James says, struggling to find a tone guard for my oval hole. Going to keep looking. You know what? I actually saw that. I think Banjo Ben, he's another amazing, educator along with Baron Collins Hill for the mandolin. And he's got tons of lessons online. And he actually just opened up an in-person store where they have, mandolins, guitars, banjos, and they all have these really cool accessories like tone guards in different shapes and different designs as well. So you can check out his website. I think That's banjobenclark.com, and see what he's got. But yeah, it was hard to find one. I remember the music store that I grew up next to, for some reason, had like a really out of shape tone guard that was held together by scotch tape. And I saw it up on the wall, and I realized what it was because I've been looking for it for a long time. And I was like, oh, I need that. And they sold it to me for like $20, something like that, because it was so poorly bent. But it served me really well. And then I ended up getting this one. I think it was off of Elderly Instruments, which is another website to check out too. But yeah, they're a bit expensive. I think they're like 75 or $80. And but once you have it, it fits any mandolin. It kind of bends to the right shape, and it's gonna make your playing feel a lot more sustained and a lot louder from the player's perspective and from the listener's perspective. So I can't recommend it enough. So Anabatic Pat says, how do you work on writing tunes? Possible Water is one I really like, and I've enjoyed learning, but it's some funky timing. Yeah, that's a good question as well. I kind of learned how to write tunes from one of my teachers, Matt Flinner, who's an incredible composer. He's written like even classical quartets, for the string quartet with the mandolin as well, and like these long form classical music pieces, which is not something I've really delved into too much, but I got a lot of inspiration from him when he did this thing with his trio, the Matt Flinner trio, called Musique du Jour, where each three members of the trio had to write a new composition on the day of their performance. Basically they started at midnight the night before, and they had until showtime to write a new tune, to work out an arrangement, and to teach it to the band to play at the show that night, which is a huge ambitious thing to do. But the idea was that, I guess quantity over quality, because not every time that you sit down to write a tune is the muse gonna flow super easy, right? And it's more about the practice of writing a tune, where you sit down and force yourself to write something, not knowing if it's gonna be good or not, and then not even allowing yourself to critique it while you're writing it, just writing it because you have a deadline coming up, and then maybe looking at it a couple days later when you have some perspective to see what the potential of that song is. I've done some other writing incentives like that, where I tried to write a new tune every day for a month. I don't know if I made it to a full month, but I think I wrote maybe 15 tunes that month, which was more tunes than I would have written any other way. And I think there was maybe 2 or 3 out of that 15 that really sounded like they had potential. Like I wanted to keep working on them and keep developing them. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had those tunes. So that's a big consideration. Just give yourself some motivation, like a personal goal, or if you have an outlet for those tunes, like you have a band you're playing in, or you have a live stream like this, like that would be a good idea for me. Actually, I should write some tunes for live streams just to give me some incentive to whip my tail into shape. But yeah, so just focusing on that. But as far as like real ideas on how to write the tunes, I think it's helpful to give yourself a structure. Give yourself like a guideline before you start writing, where you're like, okay, I'm going to write a 2-part fiddle tune here, and I want there to be some uneven timing. I want there to be like maybe a bar of 3 in both the sections, and I want it to be in the key of D Lydian, so it's D major, but it also has a G sharp in there. And that was basically what I did with Possible Water. That's a tune off of my record, The Golden Angle, and I found that was my incentive for starting, and I just sat down and wrote something, and I didn't really have much expectation for it, honestly, but then I started playing it and enjoyed it more, and it kind of stuck with me, and I remembered it later on, kept coming back to mind, so I was like, oh, maybe I should just try recording this. And that's all the tune is. It's just a 2-part fiddle tune in the key of D. It almost sounds like ended up almost sounding like a Swedish polska, I think is the right term. It's like got this really big kind of 3 feel, but I had some different time signatures in there to throw in, I guess, a little variety. So that's why the timing ended up being different. But great question. And follow-up question, Anabatic Pat says, do you ever work on tunes on other instruments? And that's something I haven't done too much. I've written like maybe 1 or 2 guitar tunes that I've ended up playing on the mandolin anyways. But mandolin has always been my primary instrument, and I like writing for this instrument because usually my compositions, I try to balance between what sounds good and what feels good. Again, kind of the same 2 criteria that I had for technique. I I want it to sound memorable and melodic to people who don't play the mandolin, but I also, from a player's perspective, want it to feel really good on the instrument too, like it was meant to be played on this instrument. Person who does that really well is David Grisman. Like all of his tunes are very mandolinistic. They all kind of suit the mandolin really well. Like I'm trying to remember. There's a couple tunes I was working on. That's a poor attempt at one of Dog's tunes, but you can tell, like, even that lick that he has there, it's so mandolin-y, right? It's like got this one lick that works on the A and the A strings, and then he just tries to do it on the A and the D strings, and then on the G and the D strings as well. So he takes this one idea and sees how it works in different parts of the mandolin. And I love that. That's why his tunes are so fun to play, and they really, I think they also have melodic quality to them as well. So trying to find that balance, it's tough, but it's a worthy goal to shoot for. Great question, Anabatic Pat. Back to James here. Says, do you adjust your bridge regularly? Sierra Hull. Oops, sorry. Scrolled down too far. Sierra was playing a show with Russ Berenberg. Apparently, he always adjusts pre-show, and she just adapts her playing instead. Yeah, I've only adjusted my bridge a few times, and it's usually due to some type of climate where I'm going out west to Colorado, where there's not as much humidity in the air, and the mandolin kind of shrinks a little bit. All the moisture is sucked out of the wood, so that the strings get lower to the fingerboard. So that's when I maybe will raise the bridge a couple twists on those knobs on the bridge there. And then when I come back to the East Coast here, it usually needs to go back down a little bit because then it gets too high because of all the extra moisture. But for the most part, I'm not really changing my action from gig to gig that often. I find it's kind of a tedious process, and I want the mandolin to feel pretty consistent. I don't want there to be any dramatic change in the action. Maybe that's what Russ is doing, though. Maybe he's trying to make it more consistent from gig to gig. But yeah, when I change the action, what I try to do is I lower the tension on every strings by like 2 or 3 twists on the tuners down here, so that the mandolin goes completely out of tune, just to release some of the pressure on the face of the instrument. So that way you can twist these dials here a little bit to raise the action. You just twist it to the left if you're raising, and twist it to the right if you're lowering. And you can tinker around with it as much as you want to, which is kind of cool. Like, it doesn't have to be consistent from one side to the other. It doesn't have to be an exact specific measurement. It can just suit the way that your mandolin sounds and the way that your playing feels on that. Check it out, see what that does for you. But I'd say, maybe once a year I'll adjust the action. Also, depending on the seasons, right? Like the winter, if you have dry heat in your house, that'll kind of sap the moisture out as well, which might mean you need to humidify your instrument as well as raise the action a bit. But yeah, I try not to mess with it too much. Once I find something I like, I try to stick with it as much as possible. Mike says, thanks for the answer. Yeah, no problem, man. And Michael says, also, I feel a lot of tension in my right wrist when playing at higher tempo, especially live. How should I practice to stay relaxed, loose at higher tempos? The tension distracts me when playing. I know the feeling really well, actually. And that's been one huge benefit of playing with Mile 12, because I've been really forced to play faster than I was comfortable playing before. And I'm still not super comfortable playing fast. In fact, we just recorded like another distance video, Mile 12 did, where we're just recording to one another's tracks in different places, and we've got some videos of each of us playing that I'm gonna whip together for a kind of a split screen video again. And this was a version of that classic bluegrass tune, "Will You Be Loving Another Man," that I learned from Tony Rice, and we played it at a pretty brisk tempo. It's not like the fastest tempo we've ever done, but I felt out of shape because I haven't really played at those tempos for a few months, being away from the band and not being on stage at all for the past half a year or so. And I had to work that muscle back up. So it's not something that, you reach a mountaintop and that's that. You don't have to worry about it anymore. It's something you always have to keep thinking about and keep stewing in the back of your mind. But I love quoting about this this case study that I don't have any reference to. I don't even know who did it, but I read this case study one time where they studied the speed of professional pianist fingers to non-musician fingers to see if there's any difference in the strength and the speed. But there actually wasn't. It's kind of cool, according to this study that I can't refer you to. So take it with a grain of salt. Hopefully it's not fake news, but you can just kind of rely or rest easy and be assured that it's not you and your personal body or your personal speed of your fingers that's keeping you back from playing faster. Basically, the only thing that they discovered that the pianists had over the non-musicians was the practice and the coordination that they gotten from the practice. And I think coordination is so key, like making sure that your fingers are there at the specific right time to play the right note for your right hand to follow through the strings. It all comes into play. But I think one of the big things with speed is you want to feel relaxed. And in order to feel relaxed, you have to really get comfortable with those tempos. I mean, maybe that sounds kind of redundant, but I think the idea is that you have to practice playing fast in order to get accommodated with that feeling of playing fast, because otherwise you're going to be thrown into these tempos where you're like, oh snap, like what do? I have to hold on for dear life here. I'm going to start playing whatever I can, and then you start tensing up, and then the whole battle's lost. So just feeling like you have some level of normalcy with those tempos is the first key. And one thing I noticed when I was working on the faster stuff with Mile 12 was I was definitely having that same problem. I was tensing up. I was having a lot of stress in my forearm here. I wasn't using my wrist at all. And I noticed I wasn't actually practicing fast. That was like the first thing I noticed, like, oh, maybe I should actually practice this to get better at it. And maybe I should try practicing it every day. And something I learned from our banjo player, BB, who's really great at this. When we were on the road together, she had this funny acronym that she would always say to help her practice. It was SWIFT. And, each letter stood for something that she wanted to practice in her practice regime. I forget what it was, but S stood for speed. No, wait. I'm getting it all mixed up now. S stood for singing because she really wanted to practice singing. W was for writing. She wanted to, compose stuff. I was for improvising. W. Wait, how do you spell Swift? No, F was for fast. That's what I was looking for. So she wanted to play fast on every practice session that she did in order to, keep exercising that muscle. It's like weight trainings or like, training for a marathon, right? If you stop running long distance for a few months, it's going to catch up with you. So that would be my main recommendation, is try playing fast and get comfortable with it. Sorry if that's maybe a little bit unhelpful or a little bit obvious, but try that out and see what it does for you. All right, so moving on here, Michael says, if in Europe, check out new acoustic gallery for tone guards. Cool idea. Jason says, thanks, I'm in the UK, so I'll check that out. All right, another question here from Uncle Bobby. Hey, Uncle Bobby, good to see you, man. All right, so on the subject of straps, I have an A-style and connect the strap wrapped around the headstock. Excuse me. It works, but I'm limited to where else to attach the strap. Any suggestions? Yeah. So when you're working with an A-style, which is A-styles are great. F-styles are really nice, but they really shouldn't sound any different than the A-styles because this fancy scroll and the points are all filled in with blocks of wood, so it's not like it's adding any extra space for resonation. Maybe it's a little bit more weighty, but it's just for looks pretty much. And if you don't have a scroll to attach the strap to, a lot of people will attach like a string behind the nut here. They'll kind of thread the string underneath the strings, but behind the nut, so it doesn't dampen any of the open string sounds. And that can be really great, but oftentimes, I guess more professional musicians who don't want to attach the strap here, I don't know why, there's some like kind of maybe visual stigma against it, but it really shouldn't be. It's really great. That's the way I guess Bob Dylan had his guitar as well. His acoustic guitar was attached to the headstock of the instrument, not to the base of the neck here. But some people will drill holes in the neck here and attach a strap button, so that way you don't need the scroll, but it's still attached beneath the neck here. But that's something I wouldn't recommend doing on your own, because there's this really delicate kind of dovetail woodwork that allows the neck to meet the body of the instrument. So you don't want to mess any of that up. So, I'd recommend getting a professional luthier to do that for you if you're interested in a strap button installation. And another thing that people do is they'll get a really big string and they'll actually thread it on this side of the mandolin neck underneath the extension here, and connect to the strap above here. So that way it's not connected by a button, and it's basically just being held up by the string underneath the neck right here and kind of coming across the face of the instrument. Both of those are options that I've seen. But great question, Uncle Bobby. Hope that helps. And then let's see, moving on here. It seems like some songs you have to vamp or chop on the downbeat in certain parts of the song. Thanks for that observation, Pelican. And yeah, I think that's a big part of the mandolin. And I think I'll be talking about this more in my chop chord video, because that's a huge role for the mandolin, is basically chopping, I guess, being the snare drum of the bluegrass band and holding down the backbeat. And that's, the main use of that chop chord, because it allows you to mute all the strings that you're playing and mute the sound of the open chord. And that way you're basically percussing more than you're sustaining, if that makes sense. You're adding more of a rhythmic element than a harmonic element. So basically the idea when you're chopping is to chop on the backbeat, which is beats 2 and beats 4, while the bass is playing on the beat 1 and the beat 3. So you're kind of giving back and forth with the bass there, and the guitar and the banjo player and the fiddle are filling in the gaps, which is so cool. And I think best way to practice this is listen to the Bluegrass Album Band, which is a group of stellar musicians who kind of revamped or revitalized the original bluegrass movement of Earl Scruggs and Lester Flatt and Bill Monroe and the Stanley Brothers and all these great musicians who kind of originated with the style there. And yeah, you can hear them play all these bluegrass standards, these classics that get called in a lot of bluegrass jams, and chop along with Doyle Lawson. So who can complain about that? So check that out if you're looking for some more chop ideas. So Jason says, you showed how to play closer to the bridge to get more bluegrass sound. What other tricks, if there are any, can help get those different sounds? That's a great observation too. That's something I talked about in the bonus lesson on Patreon, is you can, adjust where you meet the strings in this kind of spectrum right here to get a different tone, right? So playing over the bridge like that, or over the neck of the instrument, I should say, the fingerboard, then you get a softer, kind of more mellow tone. Whereas if you play down here towards the bridge, it sounds a lot harsher and maybe a little bit louder. So those are two different colors to check out. And then I usually kind of situate my pick normally at the bottom of the fretboard over the Florida here, the extension. That's where I kind of just gravitate to normally. And depending on what style of music, that might affect where you place your pick. Depending on what type of emotion or mood you're trying to exemplify, that might affect things as well. But as other ways of getting different colors, I don't know too many other ways. There could be, like we talked about, muting a little bit. That could be kind of, I don't know if that's really something you do in bluegrass, although there's some great examples of David Greer, who's one of my favorite guitar players. I got to record with him on this solo record, The Golden Angle, that I mentioned earlier, and it's killer hearing him play on some of my tunes. But there's a cool song called Old Ebenezer Scrooge that Bill Monroe wrote, and David plays an amazing guitar version of that, along with Todd Phillips playing bass on this record called True Life Blues, which was a tribute record to Bill Monroe back when he passed away. I think it even won a Grammy, which is pretty cool. And you can hear David Greer do a lot of palm muting on the guitar, where he is playing in a bluegrass setting, but using kind of more of a edgy sound. You're like, so much different tone. That could be another thing to explore. Some interesting trick, another interesting trick on the mandolin that gets some different tone is the idea of harmonics, right? That's a totally different sound. And you can get harmonics naturally if you just kind of let your left hand finger gently graze the strings at the 12th fret. But there's also ones at the 7th fret and even at the 5th fret as well. And you can even do these things called false harmonics, which I won't go into too much depth about because it's not a much of a bluegrass thing either. But you can hear like Chris Thiele and Mike Marshall do this on a cool song called Shamrock Shore, which is on their first duo record, Into the Cauldron, which I really recommend. And they do this thing where they're holding down a new note with their left hand, like say the 2nd fret on the E string. And, you know, normally on the E string you can play the 12th fret and get that harmonic. But now, since we're holding down this new note on the 2nd fret, we're making kind of a new 12th fret, so to speak, on the 14th fret. So 2 frets above 12. And then we're holding the pick between your middle and your ring instead of your index and your ring to free up your index finger to basically graze that 14th fret while you're playing through with the pick. Jingle bells, but poorly played. So that's another interesting tone to play around with. Just a couple ideas there for you, but nice question, Jason. Bobby says, thanks. Yeah, no problem, man. I'm glad that was helpful. And Michael Sappington says, what did T stand for in the Swift practice program? I think he only went to F. You're right. I think T stands for transcribe. Thanks for reminding me, because that's a really important one as well. So altogether it was singing, writing, improvising fast, and transcribe, if I'm recalling correctly. And you know, I'm not much of a singer, but the rest of the 4 I think are really, really important to me as a player. I really want to try to express my creative voice through writing and improvising, and I want to work on technique like playing faster. And the best way to do all of that really is by transcribing other mandolin players and getting inside their heads and seeing, you know, how they approach improvising, how they approach playing faster, how they, you know, get their tone and their sound. And I think all this stuff about technique, the best way to examine other players' technique is to learn something that they've played note for note and trying to really emulate their sound as you're playing along with them. Because that's the huge benefit about recording, is that you get to hang out with that amazing player and play, you know, along with them, get to try to match your sound to theirs. And there's this moment I love. It's kind of like this amazing feeling. It feels like you're flying when you can match their sound so closely with the recording. You know, maybe there's a whole band backing them up, but you can only hear one mandolin because you're matching them so closely you can't even hear what they're playing. I've only gotten that, you know, a few times, but, you know, the level of repetition and practice you have to put in to get there is pretty monumental, but it's really worthwhile, because if you can emulate their sound that closely while you're playing along with them, you're going to start adding the best parts of that to your own playing. So, you know, I can't recommend that enough. It's transcribing is the best. And James says timing. You know, that's another good aspect that starts with T. And I think BB is a metronome Nazi. You know, she goes to town with her metronome app, and I think that's, you know, one of the best things that you can do while you're working on any type of technique is making sure that you're, you know, realigning with standard time. You know, basically you're working on your own internal metronome by working with the metronome. So hopefully when you play with other people, you'll be able to match their timing as best you can. So Chris Sutter says, what angle do you hold your pick hand in relation to the mandolin top? Yeah, so that's such an important part of your tone, right? Like I mentioned in the video, the big video, 10 tips, where you don't want to like play with the mandolin neck down like this, because that makes the pick really flat against the strings. You know, I try to keep my wrist pretty naturally relaxed, so it maybe has like a little bit of a dip, but for the most part, it's pretty parallel to the ground. My pick is, that is. So if the strings are also parallel to the ground, then you're going to get that more plasticky tone when the pick meets the strings. And we're looking for more of a kind of a darker wooden tone. You want the mandolin wood to shine out more than the strings or the pick. So if you angle the neck like this and keep your wrist at the same angle, now you're picking out about a 45 or 30 degree angle, which is a good place to start. And it's different for every mandolin. Every player has a different preference too, but seeing what that does for you, where now when you do your downstrokes, you're actually playing with the knife edge of this pick. The left edge is coming into the strings on the downstroke, and then the right edge is coming up on your upstrokes to meet the strings. And if you think about it, I guess just logically, it's lowering the level of surface area that's making contact with the strings, so you're getting less of a click, and you're also, I think you're able to pass through the strings a little bit easier because there's less resistance there too. So that's a big consideration with the angle. But there's other dimensions to the right hand too, which is something I mentioned a bit in another video, where, you know, there's this dimension, there's this dimension, and then there's also this dimension. Like, how far is the pick into the strings? And those are all different angles to consider as well. And I think it's some combination of those three, where you're trying to, you know, maybe make this handshake motion as your main type of locomotion to push through the strings, but then you're also using this kind of twisting motion to angle the pick a little bit to meet the strings too. So that way, when you're coming for a downstroke, your pick is kind of gliding across the strings a little bit easier because you're angling your pick down like this. And then when you come up, you're angling your pick up a little bit too. But the danger is you don't want to do this doorknob motion too much, because it might affect, you know, the chance of actually meeting the strings. You might, you know, end up missing the strings because you're twisting the pick too much and moving it away from the strings too much. And that last consideration, just, you know, like thinking about how far your pick is into the strings, is a big consideration for tone and volume. So I find, you know, I have to remind myself to really keep the pick in there. You know, a lot of us are scared about hitting other open strings, or you know, not playing the way we want to, and that maybe forces our hand away a little bit. Also, anytime your shoulder or your arm tenses up, like my pick pulls away from the strings without me meaning to as well. So if you're tensing up, that's also going to be a problem with that. But I'd say, yeah, again, just see what works best for you. Copy other players as best you can. Play in front of a mirror, because then you can see what your hand looks like from the same perspective that you see all these great players at. And maybe bring your computer into the bathroom and you know, check out a video of your favorite player on YouTube and see what your hand looks like in comparison in that mirror. But yeah, great question about the pick hand angle. All right, a couple more questions here. Let's see. Chris Sutter says, do you hold your index finger on the pick at a certain way? Is it high on the pick or down on the pick to the point? Very good question. Yeah, so I mentioned this too in the video, so you should check it out, see if this helps too. But just to kind of explain again, I usually put the pick on the side of my index finger. So I let my fingers curl up pretty naturally, and then I'm just putting kind of the top right corner of the pick, from my perspective, on the last segment of my index finger, that last joint. And that way, you know, if you can see, my pick is actually just being held on that top corner by my index finger. And then I just lay my thumb across the top edge. So there's quite a lot of picks showing. And check out the video too, because I explain why I like to do that. I think it kind of increases your sensitivity to the strings by having a lot of that pick showing, and lets it flex a little bit more as it meets the strings. But great question. All right, Aaron Diaz, great to hear from you, Aaron. You've talked about how playing with a lot of pick extended makes it easier to feel the strings. Can you say more? What kind of feedback does the pick give you? I'm glad you asked that question. Related to what Chris was saying about too. So I think that moment where the pick makes contact to the strings is the most important part about playing with your right hand, because it really, I don't know, it really just kind of allows you to follow through in a way where if you're just swinging with brute force, or you're trying to like really sensitively feel where the pick is, it's not going to help you in the same way. It's really being able to smoothly make contact with the pick and follow through in one fluid motion. But the hardest part about that is, I think, again, that point where the pick makes contact, because if you're not making contact smoothly, you can get that double string sound. You can get like buzzing like that, muting, all sorts of bad stuff. So making sure that you get a really smooth sound is so important. And by having the pick kind of out further like this, it does allow the pick to move more than if you're to choke up on the pick here, right? So if I'm choking up on the pick, you know, if like only like that much is showing, it feels like I don't have any sensitivity with the strings, right? I'm not really feeling where the string is. I'm just moving the pick down and up, and it's making contact at some point, but I don't know when it is. I don't know exactly what time it's going to meet the pick or meet the strings. All these considerations kind of change, and I feel like I have much more control over the pick when I let the pick kind of flex, or when I let the pick kind of extend a little bit further out like this. So again, it's a different approach. It may not work for everyone, and there are some great players who do kind of choke up on the pick. I know Mike Compton, who's one of my heroes, has such a cool sound. He plays like, Monroe style better than Monroe ever did, and he's got like kind of this coolest pick grip where he even, I think, kind of holds the pick further down like this, where it's like kind of coming out where his thumb meets the palm of the hand, which is weird. It's weird, it's like. And I haven't spent too much time on that. I can't really inform you if that if that works for me or not, but you should try it out and see what you think. Really great questions here, Aaron and Chris. And hey, Chris, thanks so much for getting on Patreon. Really appreciate it. And like I've mentioned earlier, this is just kind of a precursor of some things to come here on the Patreon site, as well as discussion of what we've been doing so far with the videos here. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe on my YouTube channel, because a lot of the stuff I'm talking about here is totally free. You can just watch the videos, no questions asked. But if you want like some extra bonus mandolin content, and you want to support what I'm doing here, be so grateful for the contributions on Patreon or PayPal. And yeah, I guess we're wrapping up here. One last question from Alex. For tremolo, do you hold the pick the same way that you described, or do you recommend a slight change? And that's actually kind of a great ending question here, Alex, because I think I try not to change much of my technique from one technique to another, I guess I should say. Like tremolo, I try to do the same right hand approach that I would when I'm playing single note melodies, or when I'm playing chords, strumming all 4 sets of strings, just because I don't want there to be any extra effort going from one technique to the next. So I try to, like whether I'm playing like a maybe there's like some slight differences that I'm not totally aware of, but for the most part, I'm keeping my pick grip the same. I'm keeping my forearm, my wrist motion the same, and all I'm doing to change is maybe just giving a wider range of motion with my right hand. But for me, that's the easiest approach, and maybe the easiest isn't always the best approach. And I know there are some mandolin players out there who do change, like Sam Bush even will like kind of plant his fingers when he's doing those crazy tremolo octaves that he's kind of known for. So who's to argue with Sam Bush? So try out a couple of different options for you. But yeah, well, thanks so much for your questions, folks, and glad you're joining me. I'm so glad we kept a lot of listeners, a lot of viewers here. And yeah, if you want more stuff, check out Patreon, subscribe to the YouTube here, and check out Instagram and Facebook, and we'll be doing a lot more live streams to come, so stay tuned. But thank you guys so much, and I'll look forward to catching up with you soon. All right.